guys, welcome to another episode of the White Basement Podcast. Today I am joined in the studio by Vince Eager and Kirsty Bell, who are shooting a documentary about rock and roll legend Eddie Cochran called Don't Forget Me. Guys, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for having us.
We were talking a little bit off air before we started recording. So this is quite interesting. I don't know with either of you guys how into the woo-woo side of things you are. Are you familiar with The Secret? Have you read The Secret or watched The Secret?
Yes,
you, Vince?
No.
It's about sort of manifesting things, setting your intention to things and creating things that you want in your life. So we got new neighbours downstairs in our flat. And we were having dinner with them on Friday night, and we got on to talking about The Secret. And the woman, Maria, who's moved in, she was saying that she kind of manifested the flat, and that's how she got there. They came from Macedonia, they had no money, and it all kind of worked out. And I said, yeah, I watched The Secret a long time ago, about 15 years ago, and I watched it 2 or 3 times, and I got really excited about it. And I had this bill. This is really still a bit freaks me out. I had this bill that I needed to pay, which was £362. And after I watched The Secret, 2 days later in the post, I got a refund from the electric company for £362, which covered that bill. And to me, it was like just a kind of a message saying this stuff works. It's not going to work every time, and it's not going to do everything, but this stuff works. And then we carried on talking, and we were talking about the podcast, and they said to me, how do you get people to come into the podcast? And I said, well, I kind of just set my intention that if I'm getting in here and doing these podcasts, people will come and they will want to come on the podcast. And that was on the Friday evening. And then on the Saturday morning, Tom, who owns the studio, said to me, hey, I got these guys coming in on Monday, straight after you're in the studio, and they want to do a podcast. So that's I don't know how that fits with your beliefs on anything, but that's how this kind of rolls into my normal podcast stuff, that it just kind of happens the right way, just when it should and just how it should. And so I think that the question that I would ask you guys to start off with is, why now for the documentary?
Do you want me to answer that one?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So, rather oddly, this project came about through most things, which is talking to a man in a pub. And the man in the pub happened to be somebody who knew about Eddie Cochran. And his friend had unearthed a whole load of Eddie Cochran memorabilia during the pandemic. Now, I'm sure Vince knows this, but there's hardly been any memorabilia of Eddie Cochran available in the public domain, because his mum, Alice, basically kept as a shrine in Eddie's bedroom, because Eddie died in April 1960 in a car accident in the UK, very tragically.
And he was 21.
Yeah, he was only 21. It was Easter Sunday, 17th of April. And Vince knows all about this far better than I do, because he was not there, but he was part of the whole gang and tour at the time. So she basically locked up all of his belongings in his bedroom, and she used to treat it as a shrine and used to go and sit in it, and basically everything was kept away from being sold. When she died, his sister Gloria took that over. This is funny because this links back to your first comment. And then when she died, the family put all of his belongings and more into lockup in Pasadena in various storage units. Those storage units were bought by an antiquities collector in Pasadena, and he started to put them on eBay. He didn't even know the worth of them. And the person that we know, Sonny West, he actually is a massive collector of rock and roll memorabilia. And he saw this on eBay in the first lockdown and thought, this can't be true. They can't have this. So he bid for it and lost whatever it was. It was something like an award. I think it was his first award that he got. And and then bid for something else, and then got in touch with the seller and said, I'll buy everything. Give me, I do not want it all going to lots of different people. I want it all to be kept in one place, just like Alice and Gloria intended. And I want to set up some kind of museum for it. So anyway, he had the idea of this. He managed to get all of this information. His friend Simon was at a meeting with me and our producer Ben Charles Edwards, and mentioned it. And then we said this would make a great documentary.
Yeah.
And then I started to research about the man and what he was. He was considered like a blonde Elvis. The UK fans adored him immensely, and he made a massive impact on them. He wore outrageously fashionable and ahead of fashion clothes like red leather pants and silver vests and things like that. The girls absolutely loved him. And the story of what happened after he's died really appealed to me as a mum, of what his mother tried to do to keep his essence going and to keep in touch with his fans and everything. But the most important thing is that you might not know who Eddie Cochran is, but you will 100% know his records. Like Come On Everybody, which is an anthem for throughout all ages, Summertime Blues, something else. He was the grandfather of punk. Would you believe?
Yeah, I mean, this was when I got the phone call, and I said, yeah, okay, Eddie Cochran, yeah, I think I know the name, maybe I'm confusing with something else. And then I obviously opened my phone, went onto YouTube, and I was like, oh, wow, he sung this, and then he sung that. And you're right. I think probably because it was such a long time ago, he's become dissociated from his music, but the music everybody knows.
And that is the point, because he used to sign his autographs at such a young age. Don't forget me, Eddie Cochran. Why would you do that? Very strange signature to have.
Very strange.
Either prophetic, or didn't think he was that famous, or thought his star would be, like an immediate thing that disappeared overnight, or we could read more into it. But Don't Forget Me is exactly what's happened. We effectively have forgotten him, but we haven't forgot his music at all. And what we want to try and do with this documentary is show this powerful short life, but the power of his music post his tragic death. So we've called our documentary Don't Forget Me, because we want people to remember this icon, this legend. And
Vince, you were around. I don't want to age you past your mature years, but you were around the circuit and around Eddie at that time. Do you have any memory or recollection of him sort of thinking that he was going to die or something was going to happen? Is that something that was...
He didn't to me, but there were one or two other people that indicated he'd said strange things which one might have assumed was associated with something nice not going to happen to him. But with me, he was always ebullient. He was just full of fun and mischief, particularly. And I was... How can I put it? When I learned of his death, I was at Heathrow Airport. And I was flying to America with him because he wanted to record me, because he thought I'd been, mistreated by my manager, Barnes, regarding records. Because I was, even though I say it myself, a pretty good stage performer. But I had limited record success. And there's various reasons for that, but which we won't go into. But Eddie couldn't believe that I hadn't had a hit. And when I was going to fly to America with him, we arranged to meet at Heathrow. No, sorry, I beg your pardon. We arranged to meet at Jean's flat because Eddie had been staying when he was in London at a hotel, Stratford Court Hotel on Oxford Street. And because of this, they were working the night before we were due to fly to America. They were working, as everybody knows, in Bristol with the Hippodrome. And so I spoke to him at his digs on the Friday or Thursday. And I said, I'll meet you at the airport, blah, blah, blah. And his manager also said, that's fine, we'll do that. And then the final instructions were to meet at Jean's flat in Fulham
That's Gene Vincent, isn't
Gene
it?
Vincent,
Yeah.
I beg your pardon. To meet at Gene's flat in Fulham. So I said, okay, I'll meet you at the airport. So my driver, my roadie, Noel, he drove me to the airport because the boys didn't turn up at Gene's flat. I phoned my manager and said, get to the airport, they'll join you there. There was a party last night. Now, this would be about, I guess, 10 o'clock, Easter Sunday morning, 60. I got to the airport, I checked in, and my roadie always used to stay with my car at anywhere I may be flying from, or train or otherwise, just in case it didn't come off. Then he could take me and my luggage, whatever. So he waited. So I went in about 10 o'clock. It was 1 o'clock flight, Pan Am. And I sat in the VIP lounge. And I was sat there for a while. And then this gentleman came in, elderly gentleman. And he looked pretty much down. And he sat a few chairs from me, because the VIP lounge, you know, the armchairs. And I recognised him. It was Count Basie. And I got talking to him, or trying to talk. He seemed pretty, reluctant to enter into any sort of conversation. And it transpired that he was going home because his father had died in Chicago. And he was touring Europe with his band. He was in England, and he'd found out, so he was going back via New York to Chicago for his dad's funeral. So I thought, I won't talk about that anymore, which I didn't. So I'm having my complimentary coffee and sarnies and sat there pretty bored. Then the phone went, and there was a desk or a table in the VIP lounge, and the lady who's manning it calls me across. She said, "It's for you, Mr. Eager." I said, "Oh, who is it?" She said, "I don't know." So I took it, and it was a guy called Dennis Atherton, who was Larry's press officer, did most of Larry's publicity for his lads. And he said, "Have you heard the news?" I said, "No." Well, he said, "Well, there's been a smash. After Eddie and Gene left last night, they didn't go by train, which we all believed they were going to. They got a taxi, and apparently it had an accident, and Gene is seriously injured, but Eddie is not too bad." That's the message I got. I said, "Oh," he said, "so Eddie will possibly be able to fly with you, but you go, and then he'll fly tomorrow and meet you there." So I thought, that's strange. So I sat down, and Count Basie, he said, "Is everything all right?" I said, "Well, not really." I said, "My pal's been involved in an accident." He said, "Oh, that's sorry to hear that." I didn't mention his name. And then 20 minutes later, there's another phone call from Larry Parnes, who was the promoter of all Eddie's shows. And he said, "I've just heard from Norm Riley that it's not Gene that's very badly injured, it's Eddie. And he's not expected to live." I said, "What?" So I got my luggage back. Our driver was still waiting, got in the car. And Heathrow was situated on the M4 in those days, which is now on the A4, which became the M4. So it was a good road down to St Martin's Hospital in Bath. So we drove down. We went into reception. A lady recognised me from TV. She said, "Oh, have you come to see about Mr. Cochran?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "Oh, just wait a minute, please." So she comes back. She said, "Oh, Mr. Eager, come this way." So I went with my roadie, Noel, and we went into this office. And it was a surgeon. He said, "Are you related?" I said, "No, he's a good pal." He said, "Well, I'm sorry to say he's not going to make it out of the day, let alone, He said, he's really beyond repair. And that was that. And I went out of a different entrance then, or exit, and there was Larry Parnes, who was my manager and also promoting Eddie's shows. Norm Riley, who was the promoter, the agent from America, who had booked Eddie and Gene for the tour. Billy Fury, whose birthday it happened to be that day, and a guy called Dickie Pride, another singer and we stood there, and Larry Parnes said, and this is before Eddie died, Larry Parnes said, "Oh," he said, "that's sad," he said, flippantly. He said, "Because Eddie's next record is 3 Steps to Heaven." And with that, I just left. I said, "Come on, Noel, we're off." And I did speak to Pont. I had to because I was booked by him, but after a year, I'd had enough of him, and I broke my contract, and I had to just do nothing for 2 years. He was going to sue me, but that's how it all came about. We all got to hear, but it was awful. Then the next day, it was headlines in most of the newspapers, and there was a photograph of myself, Norm Riley, Larry Parnes, Dickie Pride, Billy Fury, myself. There's this picture that hit the papers, and it said, Vince eager to accompany body to the States. So already Parnes was getting 6 stories out of the situation, and it really peed me off. I didn't like the man anyway, and that was that. So I disappeared for a couple of weeks. I went to stay with friends in Cheam, and they didn't tell anybody where I was. Only my roadie and my mum and dad knew, and I stayed there. And that was that. I didn't go.
And that was
1960.
So
and
just
for 63 years ago, and just for context, 3 Steps to Heaven was Eddie's first UK number 1, which was released after his death. And is it prophetic again? But also the money was made after his death through having his first UK number 1.
But there's a very interesting sort of not dilemma, but it's weird for me. 18 months ago, was it? A year or 18 months ago, I saw a photo in a magazine, and it was of me with Eddie. Now, most of the photos, because people didn't have cameras in those days like they do now, of course, I had a few of Eddie and I in the dressing room and elsewhere, but I didn't have this particular photo. And I thought, I wonder where that's from. And it was quite strange because I then found out it had been discovered in this locker
Oh no!
after his death. And I want to know how it got there.
It's part of the family's photos. The locker room, as Sonny and Simon calls it, the locker room storage units are all owned by the family. So that it's either people who've gifted them to the family or the family have owned themselves.
But I couldn't understand, with Eddie being in America like me, he must have posted it to his mum, or I don't quite know how he got it.
Could have been a fan, Vince. It could have been, because the fans wrote to Eddie's mum and sister Gloria ran his fan club. It was an amazing fan club. The questions that you had to answer to get into it were obscure, to say the least. Like, do you drink milk? How many glasses of milk do you drink? Do you like boys and girls? Really, really odd questionnaire that they had. And they kept in contact with the fans for years and years and years. And from what I've seen of some of the fan letters, I am sure they would have sent photographs over.
Possibly so, yeah, it could be. Yeah. I mean,
I'll have to find it for you.
I'd love a copy. But something which was quite weird was that Larry and I didn't get on at all, and Joe Brown's a very good friend of mine, and bless him, Joe, he used to play for Eddie, and Eddie loved him. The thing about Joe is Joe's got such a terrific personality and charisma, and he's a brilliant guitarist, so everybody loved him. Some people didn't because he spoke too much truth, but others did, and I was one of them. But shortly after Eddie's death, I was sent a photocopy of something from a magazine where Eddie had been interviewed, obviously prior to his death, about your favourite colour, favourite this, favourite that, and I read it, and damn me, it came to favourite musician, and he said Joe Brown and Duane Eddy, and then the next one was, who are your best friends? And he said Gene Vincent, Buddy Holly and Vince Eager. Well, Buddy Holly, of course, had died earlier than that, the previous year, but it said he'd said Buddy Holly then, even though Buddy wasn't alive. It was weird. And myself, which then upset me even more, because I know we were very close and we did share a lot of personal things, and we got on great together, but to find out he'd put this in, and I was so chuffed because he'd put Joe alongside Duane Eddy. That was a big part of it.
So let me move the conversation a little bit, because on the 22nd of May, there's going to be a blue plaque unveiled at the Hippodrome in Bristol, Bristol Hippodrome. Yep. And so has this come about because of making the documentary?
Yeah, so Mike Reed, the DJ and songwriter, he was a massive Eddie Cochran fan and is friends with Joe Brown and Vince, everybody. And he decided he would make a case for the blue plaque. He thought it was well overdue. And we had a long discussion about which venue should it be at, where should it be at. Initially we were thinking of Ipswich because that was the first date. Yeah, first date of that tour, which Vince was at. And then Mike got in touch with various of the venues, and the Bristol Hippodrome said, "We've been waiting for this. This is what we would love to have." So then the campaign, because you've got to go through a process, and it's not just, you can have a blue plaque. So I think it took Mike around about 6 months to get the okay for it.
And do you think that 6 months is
I think it's quick.
Because it was Mike Reed?
I think he knew people, but I think also because the Bristol Hippodrome had said they wanted to do it as well. Also, there used to be a commemoration of his death at the place of the crash, I understand, every year. And I think, sometimes you hit on the right time, and a bit like right time, right place.
Yeah.
So we've had a real difficulty getting a date put together to get certain people there, because with no disrespect, the people who actually knew Eddie are most of them are in their late 70s, early 80s. And we've had COVID and various lockdowns, and people have been poorly, and people are reluctant to travel still. So we're very fortunate that we've actually managed to get a date. We've had several dates, but this one is 100% going ahead on the 22nd of May. Bristol is really looking forward to it as well.
Today, what's the date today?
It's the
15th.
15th, yeah.
So not long to go.
Yeah, next Monday.
Yeah, exciting.
So really looking forward to it. And I think it's Eddie got admitted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1986. So I think this is fitting for his British fans. Because when he did pass away, my understanding, and Vince, please correct me if I'm wrong here, is the column inches in the States were very few.
Minimal.
Yeah, very few and far between. His fan base was burgeoning, I think the right word, in the UK. And his career was really taking off in the UK. And the column inches in the UK were 100-fold. And remembered, I think, exceptionally well in the UK, Vince, because of the friends he'd made on the tour in the musicianship as well. But there's a little known fact about Eddie, if you'd like me to tell you this.
Absolutely.
One, he had size 4 feet and used to wear sample shoes. He had a massive collection of unusual shoes, some of which have been found in these lockers. Secondly, when he came over to the UK, he had a whole new wardrobe. So in America, he used to wear a sports coat and peg slacks and loafers. And I don't know whether Jean gave him a few hints, Vince.
He may have done, because they did tour together a lot. They did Australia, was one place they did, but I would think possibly so, yeah.
Because he started wearing red leather pants and silver vests and brightly coloured shirts and everything, and became a massive hit, like in that
Maybe
way.
a different market, I guess, different sort of cultural sensibilities.
But his sense of humour was wicked. I mean, I remember we were doing a show at Taunton, Odeon or Gaumont, and my driver, my roadie Noel, his sister lived in Somerset, in Frome, And so from London, we said, my driver said, let's go find my sisters in Frome. She'd love to meet Eddie, because I knew it. And so he said, well, it's fine. So we left a couple of hours earlier, and we drove to Frome. And we had tea, Somerset tea, and got in the car. Now we were off the beaten route, sort of country roads. And I'd said to Eddie one day, or Eddie had said to me one day, man, I want to drive on the right-hand side of the road. I said, why? He said, because I do. I was promised it in Australia, because they do, of course, but I couldn't do it, but I want to do it. And your car is an automatic. And I said, okay. And he'd been on about this for a couple of weeks. So we're in the countryside outside Frome. And I said, come on, Ed, drive. So he got behind the wheel and he was lethal. I had to stop him within less than half a mile. I said, man, you're not safe. You're not safe. So we got to the theatre, and we got there about 4:00 in the afternoon, and we were sharing a dressing room. And I came out to talk to one of the musicians or something. And I went back in, and there he was naked in our dressing room. I said, what are you doing? You're not on for another couple of hours. He said, I'm after your ass. I said, what? And he said, I've got it. And with that, I ran out of the dressing room door, and I ran across the stage with this naked hero of mine chasing me up the aisles, back down again. And we got back to the... He went round and back to the dressing room, and I nipped outside on one of the crash... they had the crash doors to get out. So I got out and he went back. But that was his sense of humour. And apparently when he'd been in Australia, which was the only right-hand side driving of the road he'd visited, he was totally captivated by the fact that he could actually drive on the right-hand side of the road. And so he said he wanted to out there, they wouldn't let him. I let him for about a mile or whatever it was. It was very short, and he nearly killed us then. So, and that was only, I guess, 4 or 5 weeks before he did actually die in a car crash.
Well, that actually, you kind of preempted my last question that I was going to ask you, which is, what's your most rock and roll story? There must be a more rock and roll than being chased by a naked Eddie Cochran. Is it? Am I right in thinking that the fish and chips up to Glasgow, was that you?
Yeah, with Billy Fury, that was.
Yeah, you drove from London.
Yeah, fish and chips. That's all right. What's wrong with that?
Just briefly explain that. I don't know anyone who's driven 400 miles to.
Joe and I had been working in Glasgow at the Empire for a week, and we found this great fish and chip shop, really good. So we used to go there every night after the show and get fish and chips and go back to the flat we were renting for the week. And we got back to London. Now, when in London, there was a period of time for about 6 months, I guess, that Billy, Joe and I had flats in the same building in Paddington, Westbourne Park. Joe was in the basement with his mum. I was on the ground floor and Billy was on the first floor. And we were always in Joe's flat, and Mum Brown was looking after us and cursing us for being so close to her and all this, And she was a real character. So when we finished in Glasgow, we came back and we sat there on the Monday evening, and Joe says, "God, blimey, mate, I can half fancy some of those fish and chips from Glasgow." I said, "Yeah, it'd be nice, wouldn't it?" So Billy said, "Were they good?" We said, "Yeah, they're great." "Well, come on then, let's go up." And Billy had just bought an MGB GT, little blue sports car. So we got in his car and we drove up to Glasgow for fish and chips.
The three of you?
No, 2 of us.
And bought them back
Billy and
again.
and we bought them back.
So how long is that a round trip? That's like 800 miles.
There was no motorways then. There was the M1 was open then. The M1 was just
they're
about
not cold
open.
when you got
Oh yeah, of course they were.
I mean, that
didn't matter, did it?
That's pretty rock and roll.
That's
pretty rock and roll.
Yeah, it's rock and roll. That's what we did. We did some daft things.
Have you got another one?
I think you need to know about the wrestling.
I mean, Joe, not Joe, Eddie and I, we were invited to a party in my hometown of Grantham. And Gene heard about it and he wanted to come as well. Well, it so happened we work in Leicester, which wasn't far from my hometown. So I said, come across to my place in Grantham, stay the night, we'll, have a bit of fun. Then we'll go to tomorrow's gig. So he's going back to London because I forget where the next day's gig was. So we did, and they came after the show back to Grantham, and my road manager, Noel, had set all this up. And he said, there's a great party going on, and I forget the name of the street, which annoys me, but there's a big party going on. Loads of girls, booze, and I said, all right, let's go. So we went, and they had candlelight, so you could hardly see anybody. And Eddie and Jean had a really, really good time. I behaved myself somewhat because it was Grantham and bad news travels fast. And it wasn't until 2 weeks afterwards that I found out what Eddie and Jean had been up to. Then nobody knew who they were because the lights were so low and nobody asked them.
Incognito.
Pardon?
Incognito.
Yeah, Incognito.
Natural charm.
Yeah. Jean couldn't be relied upon for consistency, other than being consistently either good or bad. That's wrong. Either full of fun or miserable. That was
consistently inconsistent.
Yeah, consistently inconsistent. But Eddie was always the same. He never varied. He was up for a laugh. I think the worst time I had with them was when we'd worked at the Worcester Gaumont, and Eddie came in off stage. He closed the first half, and he said, have you seen Jean, who was in the separate dressing room? I said, no. Why? He said, man, he's struggling with his leg. He said, he's really bad. So we watched Jean from the wings in the second show, and bless him, he could hardly move. So we came off, we went back, we were staying. Ironically, it was called the Star Hotel in Worcester, and we all had 3 separate rooms. And we went to Jean's room, and I hadn't seen him before, but he was in so much pain, Eddie took his leg iron off. And then they sat there, and I didn't drink in those days and probably very rarely have a beer. And they had a bottle of Jack Daniels, and they just woofed it down them and got absolutely wrecked. And it seemed to kill the pain for Jean. And that was that. I went to bed and left them comatose on their beds.
So, okay, that actually kind of might tie everything up nicely, because leg injuries and sport. Right. This was originally a jiu-jitsu podcast, as I said to you before. And you said to me that rock and roll in the UK was kind of synonymous and was linked with wrestling.
It was, very much so. There used to be the most popular place in the West End from about 1956 onwards. There was a place called the Two Eyes Coffee Bar. And it had been bought by 2 wrestlers, Ray Hunter and Paul Lincoln. And they'd brought it off 2 Iranian brothers whose Christian names began with I, hence the 2 eyes. And there was a cellar, and you could just about get 70, 80 people in there, and had a tiny stage. And they used to have people coming on and doing things. And then it started where Wally Whiten, a guy called Wally Whiten, had a group called the Vipers. And they started playing there, and they were really good. They were a skiffle group. Now, skiffle was a spin-off of trad jazz, and it was acoustic instruments such as banjo, guitar, double bass, sometimes the drums, but more so with the washboard. And the Two Eyes Coffee Bar, the basement, became the top place for this. And then 1 or 2 guys started going in, and they had like open mic, as you might call it. Wasn't really, it was just somebody gets up and sings, but they used to have open mic. And then people started singing Elvis Presley and Bill Haley songs, Charlie Gracie. And then the 2 guys that owned the Two Eyes, Paul Lincoln and Ray Hunter, were wrestlers. And they used to sit in the basement where we used to play, and they would sit together and plan out a forthcoming bout, the evening of bouts. They used to do a lot of the Granada cinemas, and they would say, okay, well, when we get to Bedford, maybe, how many times has this guy been there? Well, let him lose this time. So he loses hair.
You mean it's not real?
Oh, sorry to shatter your dreams. And they used to plan, and we knew what was going to happen. Well, there was a guy, and I'm trying to think of his name. Les, his name was. Let's call him Les for now. And he used to manage a rock and roller called Wee Willie Harris, and they had a piano down the Two Eyes. And they encouraged this Wee Willie, as they called him, to get up and play, which he did. And he was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And more and more rock and rollers. Terry Dean came in there, Tommy Steele. And so it became the birthplace of British rock and roll. And there is a plaque outside. It's a fish and chip shop now, sadly, Paul Poppy's. But outside there's this plaque which Marty, Cliff, the Dallas Boys... quite a number of us went to commemorate for the unveiling, and it's still there. But the place is a fish and chip shop. But they're still using the fish and chip shop to interview people relative to 1950s rock and roll, and they've got these terrible American pictures up there, which totally sort of. It's disingenuous because it was nothing to do with our era. We were washboard, piano, guitar, T-chest bass down there. That's what it was. And I myself, I had a trio, 3 guys, and we'd been in the World Skiffle Championships on a Monday night, which was live on television. And the bass player was a guy... I started playing the harmonica with, named Brian Licorice Lockin, and he later went to play with Marty, then the Shadows, when I was with Larry Parnes. But Licorice and I, we went down there, and we were lucky, and the guy offered us a residency. So we left our homes in Grantham, and we went down there, and Brian and the other 2 guys, Brian and I made it, but the other 2 guys, their musical standard wasn't up. Well, their music wasn't up to standard, and we're still good pals. Well, we were till a couple of passed on. But the Two Eyes was, and you'd get people going in there out of curiosity, particularly the Americans. It's where Vince Taylor started. He came from America, although he was English, and he started in the Two Eyes Coffee Bar. Wally White and the Vipers, they were massive. Cliff, he was discovered there.
This is Cliff Richard.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Cliff was discovered there. Billy used to sing down there. That was when we lived together, and we used to go down. We used to nick Larry Parnes, our manager's car keys, off his bedside table when he was asleep, and we used to get in his car and go down the West End from his Knightsbridge flat.
That's why he didn't like you when you were a bit older.
He didn't like me the minute. He liked me the minute he left me, but he didn't met me.
Vince Taylor does an amazing Eddie Cochran cover.
Okay.
And it's one of the few music videos, I suppose, from that day.
Yeah.
He was famous in France. He had most of his career in France.
He did. He was very...
He's just like... It's literally what I truly believe the Sex Pistols must have followed when they covered Eddie Cochran's 2 songs, is energy. And he's all over the stage. He's like, it's almost like punk rock before punk rock was invented.
And all of these things are they all up on YouTube? These kind of music videos and
the Vince Taylor one is.
So if you send me some links, I'll put links to all of these in the show notes.
Yeah.
All the bits and pieces that we've talked about, and some of Eddie's songs, and probably some of your stuff as well, Vince.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're gonna probably keep it nice and short, as we've been instructed to do. So thank you very much for talking to me. And this is a bit of a crossover, right? Because you guys are shooting and I was recording this morning. So it's really nice.
Thank you very much for having us.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah, it's been really nice to chat. And the documentary, you're aiming for the end of this year or beginning of next?
Depends on distributors about when they think the theatrical release should happen. But we're hoping either Q4 this year or Q1 next year.
Is there somewhere to follow the progress of the film? Is there a web
We're
page or
about to
holding
set
page
that
or
up.
something?
Once we get our main contributors, of which Vince is very important to that. Once we get them all in the can, then we're going to set up the website so people can see the progress of the documentary that way.
Yeah, so I'll add that also to the show notes. So
100%. We'll send you the link.
There.
Just to tell you that when Vince Taylor, he was born in England, then he went to America with his sister, who married one of the producers of the major cartoon networks in America. Then he brought Vince back here to make it because he thought he was a rock star. And Vince came back, and Vince, they went down to the Two Eyes Coffee Bar, and they picked up a band there, and two of them were, well, one was Brian Bennett, who you've seen this afternoon, and the other one was Brian Licorice Luckin, and they started playing for Vince Taylor, and that's how he got started with them. But Vince Taylor was not a popular guy, hated me because my real name is Roy Taylor, but Larry gave me the name of Vince Eager. So that being Vince Taylor and me being Roy Taylor, he just disliked me immediately. And thankfully, I had great support from, well, it didn't matter, but probably the best of how life is, you can never tell. We were booked, Vince Taylor, myself, excuse me, to appear in Paris at the, what's it called? It's the biggest theatre there. Biggest theatre in Paris, I forget what it's called now. We had to go across on the train, the boat train. So you used to board it at Victoria and go through customs in Victoria, pre-European, and you used to go through, and that was it. You were then taken on the train onto the ship and across to Calais. So this is how it worked out. And so it was an overnight trip. And just before we got to Paris, the promoter comes in. Willie Harris and I are there. Vince Taylor's in another cubicle. And he said to us, the press are going to be there to greet you. We're only there for 2 or 3 nights. The press will be on the platform when the train pulls in at 6 o'clock. So anybody who is prepared to put on the stage clothes and makeup, you will be like big stars. We thought, yeah, we heard all that. So Willie and I said, are you doing that? I said, I'm not either. So we got off and we saw Vince Taylor get off the next carriage with his leathers, makeup, his band, and there was about 10 photographers, and they're all around them taking photographs. And Vince Taylor wasn't supposed to close the show. Willie was going to close the show. I was closing the first half. All of a sudden, Willie was put in my place, and Vince Taylor was put in his. He went on that night, absolutely wowed them. And the next day, we saw him in a coffee bar nearby about 3 p.m, and he looked absolutely rough. And apparently what had happened, he'd picked up a lady of the night, and he'd got in her car, and he was amused to find that it was a British car, hence the steering wheel was on the right-hand side of the road. And it was the girls of the night, late at night, used to use these cars because it was close to the pavement and they could chat people up without leaning across. So the hookers in Paris used to drive on the right-hand side of the road, and it was Vince Taylor. He actually told me that. And he stayed there. He didn't come back to England. He came back for a bit, and then he became a massive star. He was a massive star in France, just because he was prepared to put makeup on and his stage suit at 6 o'clock in the morning.
So let that be a lesson to you guys who are listening.
Yeah.
Put your makeup on and put your stage suit on. Never miss an opportunity is the lesson. And if you need to find some company when you're in Paris, look for a right-hand drive car.
That's a good point.
All right. So thank you again for coming in and chatting. All you guys who are listening to this, probably my normal people, you know where to follow the podcast, which is at White Basement Pod on Instagram. And hopefully all the people who are your audience who've never heard of me and would never listen to my podcast, at White Basement Pod on Instagram. And we'll catch you next time.